Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. The entire world has its eyes on Gaza, and every day it seems we're seeing horrific images, either flattened cities of rubble or starving children, even as the Israeli government denies any starvation is happening. Many of us were horrified by what happened on October 7th and Hamas's brutality, but many are now equally horrified by the extent of the destruction and suffering in Gaza. After airdrops of food were recently permitted over Gaza, aid workers from other countries were able to see the scale of the destruction for the first time. Photos and videos have emerged taken from the air of the massive extent of devastation that Israelis' carpet bombing campaigns have caused. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now seizing and occupying Gaza, which some claim has been the intent all along. It's a move harshly criticized by his own Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, who said, quote, "Occupying the Strip would put Israel in a black hole, taking responsibility for 2 million Palestinians, requiring a years-long clearing operation, exposing soldiers to guerrilla warfare, and most dangerously, jeopardizing the hostages." It's important to note that Netanyahu is wildly unpopular in Israel, with 100,000 Israeli citizens recently marching in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem protesting the war in Gaza. And a recent poll shows that 70% of Israelis do not trust Netanyahu or his government. And he's also facing criminal charges for corruption, which include bribery and accepting lavish gifts in exchange for political favors. His trial will move forward as soon as the war ends, which is why his critics say it's in his self-interest to prolong this war. And as to Gaza, Netanyahu is denying that there is any famine there, in spite of what we're all seeing with our own eyes, instead claiming it's a man-made crisis manufactured by Hamas.
There is no starvation in Gaza, no policy of starvation in Gaza, and I assure you that we have a commitment to achieve our war goals.
President Trump, interestingly, has openly contradicted him several times, acknowledging that not only is there real starvation, but that they need to get more food into Gaza. Today, I'm honored to welcome onto my show Jason Jones to talk more about all of this. Jason is a film producer, author, activist, popular podcast host, and human rights worker. He's president of the Human Rights Education and Relief Organization, also known as HERO, known for its two main programs, the Vulnerable People Project and Movie to Movement. In 2006, he was executive producer of the award-winning film Bella. That's a great film. And in 2009, he was associate producer of another award-winning film, The Stoning of Soraya M. He has published multiple books, and his latest is Dispatches from the Great Campaign, Defending Life on the Front Lines. The Vulnerable People Project has delivered millions of meals to those in need in Sudan, Nigeria, Malawi, Zambia, Afghanistan, Hawaii, and Gaza. And as a true pro-life advocate, Jason acts on behalf of all the vulnerable and needy, from babies in the womb to our suffering brothers and sisters in war-torn nations. So Jason, thank you so much for being here today.
Christine, thanks for having me on your show.
So you have done some incredible work all over the world. I want to focus on Gaza today. And, your work has highlighted the plight of Christians in Gaza. And you wrote an article titled, "Help, I'm an Anti-Palestinian Bigot." And I just want to read an excerpt. Okay, quote, "Recently, while shooting interviews for a documentary about Palestinian Christians, I discovered something shameful about myself. I am an anti-Palestinian bigot. In interview after interview, I caught myself having these surprise thoughts. Wow, she has a PhD? As if Palestinians are incapable of intellectual pursuits. Wow, he's such a nuanced conversationalist. As if Palestinians are genetically bound to be inarticulate simpletons. She's so beautiful, like Palestinians are ugly as a rule. He's so thoughtful and empathetic, as if Palestinians are all childlike narcissists," close quote. So let me ask you, why do you think you initially gained such ideas in the first place about Palestinians, and how has your mind changed since then?
Well, thanks, Christine, for sharing my most embarrassing article I ever wrote. I wrote that.
It was a great article.
Thank you. No, and when I wrote it, I was really nervous on how my Palestinian friends would take it, and they were all very grateful that I wrote it. But I was being honest, and actually what inspired me to write it initially was friends of mine were worried that I would be called anti-Semitic because I was bringing food into Gaza or evacuating wounded women and pregnant women and children and wounded children. And so I was going to try to write an article detailing my latent anti-Semitism, which I could find none. And so I was wrestling with how to address this in an article. While I was in Egypt, we had evacuated pregnant women who had also been wounded. So these were wounded pregnant women and their families and their children. And yeah, I sort of heard my internal dialogue. We had to hide, people say that the whole region is against Israel. Well, the truth is the whole region is really aligned against the Palestinians or turned their back on them. It's really the poorest, weakest, and most marginalized community in the Middle East. And so we had to set up a clandestine television studio basically to film these interviews because we didn't want Egyptian intelligence to find out that we were there. And so we're in the middle of Cairo, in a bad neighborhood where no one would look for us, in the bottom of a building, in the basement of a building. And as I was interviewing these women, I just really came to understand how bigoted, even though I saw myself as a humanitarian serving Palestinians, that I had these deeply ingrained prejudices. And the reality is all of us do. We really all do. And it's inescapable because it permeates our media. And we hear members of Congress, like Congressman Fine, say, drop atomic bombs on them. We watch politicians like Nikki Haley sign bombs with messages like, finish them, knowing that 9 out of 10 casualties are civilians. We hear genocidal rhetoric from people we respect across the ideological, or that I should say we respected across the ideological spectrum. We listen to Christian Zionists say that Israel has a moral imperative, a divine command, actually, to commit genocide and ethnic cleansing of the region of Palestinians. So all of us have sort of been, we've all suffered under this sort of aggressive influence campaign that formed us in a deeply held prejudice. I can't imagine this being acceptable anywhere else in the world. I mean, what I've, VPP, I've been on the front lines in Ukraine in the war against Russia. I was in Sudan during the genocide in Darfur. I was with the Peshmerga in Iraq as they were liberating Christian and Yazidi villages from ISIS. And I have to say that was horrible. And at the time, I couldn't have ever imagined seeing anything more horrible. But what we're seeing in Gaza really makes the destruction of ISIS in the Levant pale in comparison. There really has been nothing like it. Even its advocates compare it to Nagasaki, Hiroshima, Dresden, and the firebombing of Tokyo. And that's an accurate comparison.
Wow. Do you think that justifying what's happening in Gaza requires dehumanizing Palestinians?
You absolutely have to dehumanize them. And can I tell you, it's really striking in my experience now in the past 3 years with the Palestinian community, is they are truly the kindest, most gracious community I've ever been a part of. And I've spent a lot of time with the Christian community, and I've just been baffled at really their dignity, the holiness of the community. And I've thought a lot about this. And, just as grace builds upon our nature as Christians, I believe that grace builds upon the nature of our families and our communities. And when you're looking at the Palestinian Christian community, you're looking at a community that's been Christian since Christ. Their families walked with Christ. They are the descendants of the families that were in the upper room. This is just a fact. This is the oldest Christian community in the world. I was just at an event in New York City with Palestinian and Jewish leaders speaking out against the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And what was striking to me in the midst of this just horrible catastrophe that's really unimaginable, and I can share with you something that just happened yesterday, but it's just unimaginable horror for these families. They still always are worried about the rise of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred because of the crimes of the state of Israel. I've never been with a Palestinian that hasn't expressed that their grave concern that the tragedy that they're suffering at the hands of the state of Israel could lead to a rise of abusive Jews. Another thing I always get from my Palestinian Christian friends is when I tell them that they're the ethnic descendants, well, they already know, but I say I'm baffled by Christian Zionism, that they turn their back on you when you're the descendants of the Jews that accepted Jesus in the first century. They'll always be the first to quote scripture and remind you that there is no longer Jew or Gentile, that we've been grafted in, and that the third temple is Christ, and the bricks of that temple are the members of his body. And they're always the first to remind you of that. It's a very special community. They're also in the Middle East known as the most highly educated community. And education is very important to them. In fact, if you know a Palestinian, he's probably your dentist or your doctor or your orthodontist in the United States. So they're very educated. The Catholic community there, the Orthodox community there is really holy, extremely devout, faithful. Yet, like the president of Babylon Bee just last week denied that they're even Christians, which is unbelievable that an Anglo-American evangelical Christian would deny that an apostolic Christian community that's roots go back to St. James himself would deny that they are Christians.
That's been one of the most baffling things for me. You mentioned Christian Zionism. That's definitely a very big and important topic. We know Ted Cruz recently told Tucker Carlson that the reason that he supports Israel is because the Bible tells him to, and he identifies Israel as the state that was created in 1948. And then, of course, you have Mike Johnson recently kind of saying the same thing, that we have a duty to support the state of Israel. And, of course, as Catholics, we understand that when the Bible mentions Israel, it means, of course, the people of God, meaning the church, the body of believers, does not mean the 1948 state. So, does this highlight to you how important it is to get your theology right? Because it can lead to the most disastrous consequences?
Yeah, it's striking, right? And you could think of in the late 19th century in Germany, there was a fascination with ruins and old language and poetry and dancing around the maypole, and these weird societies like the Thule Society were formed that could have seemed almost harmless. And one would have never imagined it could have morphed into this monstrosity of the National Socialists, the Nazi regime. I would say it's the same thing with Christian Zionism. You read the Left Behind book series with its theology of the rapture, which always concerned me because I felt when the persecution finally reaches the affluent American suburbs, they're going to lose faith when they're not raptured, and that was my great concern. But, it seemed almost childish in the 80s or 90s when I first was exposed to Christian Zionism, and I was first exposed to it as an atheist, but it still just struck me as kind of strange and childish. But when I guess I really didn't understand, which maybe I should have been able to see even then, was that this virulent ethno-nationalism reducing the gospel of Jesus Christ into a genocidal screed. You can read books, you can go to Barnes & Noble or your local evangelical bookstore, and their best-selling books are sort of Gnostic genocidal fantasies, and the victims of this genocide being the Palestinians, who they call, quote, the reincarnation of Amalekites. This is very bizarre and anti-human. And, when Ted Cruz says the Bible tells him so, what he means is powerful special interests tell him so. I think that that's what he means. And what our faith tells us, as James tells us, that pure religion is caring for widows and orphans, not making widows and orphans. And that's what the state of Israel has been doing. There are 18,000 children in Gaza with not a living relative. And this week alone, VPP delivered 10,000 meals to orphans and one hot meal to every Christian in Gaza this week. And we're also going to be delivering 10,000 cans of baby formula. We actually started the delivery of baby formula today, but sort of the coldness and the callousness that people see to the devastation of Gaza and the gaslighting, and it's really just, it is unbelievable. And I do think we have to look at the polling. Everyone under 30 is watching this ethnic cleansing live streamed on their phone. I think that the evangelical church is going to die in Gaza because these young evangelical Christians are horrified to hear their parents and their pastors cheering out, not only denying an ethnic cleansing, but they will speak out at two sides of their mouth. On the one hand, they'll say there's no ethnic cleansing going on. And on the other hand, they'll say we're going to move them to Libya, to Sudan. I've heard Libya today. I guess the White House said they're going to move them to South Sudan. I work in South Sudan. I work in Sudan. Libya is the one country we want to work in. We haven't been able to enter yet. And we work in some pretty tough neighborhoods. The idea that you're going to send Palestinians to Libya is really just utterly unbelievable. And that is the definition of ethnic cleansing. And they cheer this on. So their children are seeing this. And this is why we as Catholics it's important that we communicate the truth, and we live a life in solidarity with the vulnerable, so that we could turn the scandal, that this has been a real scandal, and a lot of people are going to lose their faith over this scandal. We want to do our best to turn that stumbling block into a stepping stone and lead people into the church.
Right. You know, it's actually really disturbed me, the number of Catholics who've been infected by this sort of blind ideological adherence to the state of Israel. And I've interacted with some of them, and some of them are people who are very devout Catholics. They're practicing Catholics, all of that, claim to be pro-life. But then you challenge them with what the IDF is doing over there, what Netanyahu is doing over there, and they almost become irrational. You hear the anti-Semitism, you're an anti-Semite, and you support Hamas. And even when what happened with Holy Family Catholic Church in Gaza, you have 3 parishioners who died. And even then, some of these Catholics were more willing to defend the IDF than they were willing to defend their own Catholic brothers and sisters.
Yeah, they have they believe in the not papal infallibility, but Benjamin Netanyahu infallibility. Even this week, you had former heads of the Mossad, former ministers of defense, and several hundred field-grade military officers in Israel sign a letter to President Trump saying, bring this war to an end. It's undermining the interests of the state of Israel. And, the reality of the borders in the Middle East are confused, and they're confusing by design. They're designed to make the region unstable and easy for exploitation, going back to the post-Ottoman world. And I think those of us who are Catholics living in a constitutional republic should advocate for political orders in the Middle East that treat every community as an end in themselves. And half of the Jews in Israel are from the region. They're not from Europe. They're from Iraq, and they're from Yemen, and they're from Iran, and they're from North Africa. And in the post 1948 reality, we have to be really thoughtful in what we advocate politically. And there are a lot of prudential differences that we can have, but we should be committed that there should be a homeland for the Palestinians, and that the Palestinians should live in freedom to be able to live out their faith and their religion, to move freely. The West Bank, that they live in an apartheid state, and that is just a reality. Palestinians do not have equal rights. In Gaza, they're being ethnically cleansed. Just this week and last week in the West Bank, every single day, settlers are launching attacks on the only 100% Christian village in the West Bank. And then we have the Speaker of the House go to the community that is terrorizing Christians and actually killed an American 2 weeks ago. And he's telling them that is your land. You have an American evangelical telling settlers that come from Ukraine, Russia, and New York City that, basically keep it up. And a lot of people say, Jason, why aren't you more outspoken on Nigeria? Which I am. Why aren't you more outspoken on India? I wrote an article today on India. I am. But I do speak out more, and I write a lot more on what's happening in Gaza and why. The Speaker of the House isn't going to Nigeria and cheering Boko Haram on as they're attacking Catholics. The Israeli Defense Force, the same week that a tank fired into Holy Family Catholic Church, wounding the priest, killing 3 people, wounding over a dozen more. The same week, snipers fired on the water tanks at Holy Family Church, emptying those tanks of water, tanks that the Vulnerable People Project paid for that water. And we provide all the water for those 2 communities. And I think the IDF on helicopters paid for with our taxpayer dollars, holding sniper rifles that we sent them and we paid for, are shooting holes in water tanks. And why are they doing that? It is obvious. They want to ethnically cleanse Gaza of Palestinians, and they have seemed to especially target the Christian community. And it's been very brazen. And I wrote an article that maybe was a bit sanctimonious and imprudent to publish, but I said, where are all the Alpha Catholics? All I see is Beta Catholics.
Do you believe the IDF when they claim that these are all mistakes?
No, I mean, not at all. You can look at the attack on the World Food Kitchen staff. It was not only were they attacked by drones, They were relentlessly attacked by several sorties of drones until every last one of them was dead. You had 2 Catholic women in December 16th of 2023 that were shot while they were in the church courtyard. They were in the church grounds. And it's impossible to think that this was a mistake. You had a 2,000-pound bomb fall on the church. You had a tank aim with Cardinal Pizzaballa and Pope Leo of all suggested, looks like it was intentional. You have snipers in helicopters shooting at the water towers at Holy Family Church. Had to be intentional. Let me just tell you something that happened yesterday that was quite tragic. So the Vulnerable People Project, we were delivering hot meals to every Christian in Gaza this week. We were also setting up our orphan distribution system. And because there were some American Palestinian friends of mine that let me know that their family was starving in Khan Yunis, we decided that we would go to the camps there and set up and deliver 2 meals a day every day for 5 days to that community. The first thing I did yesterday morning when I woke up was I grabbed my phone to look at the WhatsApp messages because I wanted to see our VPP teams delivering food, not only to the churches and the orphans, but to my friend's family. But instead, tragically, what I saw was that hours after VPP had delivered food to this community, my friend from Pennsylvania, a prominent Palestinian American, his cousin, his cousin's wife, his children, and his grandchildren all died within hours of receiving food from us on a direct strike on the camp from the IDF. So either Israel is truly the most incompetent military in the history of the world, or they're in the most immoral military in the world, because more journalists have died in Gaza, that little strip of land, in a war that's gone on less than World War II, than has died in World War I, World War II, and all wars that have taken place since World War I. More journalists have died in Gaza. Just yesterday, Al Jazeera had their last team of journalists killed. So the entire Al Jazeera news crew was wiped out. Also, we see this with aid workers. Aid workers, we've seen more aid workers die in Gaza than all wars from World War I until today combined.
Wow.
So either they're inept or this is intentional. I have my own theories on why there are so many civilian casualties, especially journalists. And I think it has to do, they have an AI program that you can come in, honey. You have an AI program that gives credit scores to everyone in Gaza. Imagine you're a journalist and you are filing reports that are telling the truth about the crimes of the IDF in Gaza. What credit score do you think that you'll be given by this AI system? Then they have another targeting program that takes these credit scores, and then commanders will target people based on score. I suspect this is why we see so many journalists dying. There was a journalist, a woman who was focused specifically on documenting all of the children, the newborns and toddlers that were being killed by the IDF. Well, when she was in her apartment a day after giving birth, her husband went to the hospital to get the birth certificate, and there was a very directed drone strike into her apartment, killing her and her newborn child. So the father came back with the birth certificate, and his wife and child were gone. And there's story after story after story after story of this going on. They'll tell you that they're going to starve Gaza. You can listen to their right-wing politicians openly say, we're going to starve Gaza. We're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Then you will see Gazans starving to death. And you will hear prominent politicians openly say they're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza. And then they will come about and say, there is no ethnic cleansing, there is no starvation, there is no hunger. And then they'll say, oh, well, there is hunger. Well, that's because Hamas is stealing the food to sell it. Well, if they're stealing the food to sell it, it's in their best interest to let food in so they have more food to sell. But the reality is the reason why Gaza is starving is because of Israel's blockade, period. And because the massive amount of damage is 95% of structures have been completely demolished in a community of more than 2 million people. But there are these cliches of genocide that I call them. The great philosopher, German Jewish philosopher Hannah Arendt, writing on the Holocaust, said that she talked about the banality of evil, and that they don't speak really in slogans of violence, but just sort of cliches. And one of the cliches that we hear is, well, Hamas is stealing the food. Well, to put this in perspective, obviously gangs and Hamas are stealing food. Of course, this will be happening, but that's not having any impact on the overall nutrition of these 2 million people. For Hamas to, if they were only eating 1,000 calories a day in Gaza, and as the IDF said, Hamas is stealing 25% of the aid, that would be the equivalent of 150 container trucks a month. Now, what would be the manpower needed for Hamas to steal 150 trucks to move the food, hide the food, sell the food, hide the trucks, while they're fighting one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world, with the U.S. support, with their drones, with their satellites? We would know where these trucks are. You can't hide 150 trucks a month. There is a policy of starvation, and Israel cannot run from this forever. When this war ends and Western journalists are finally allowed in, because journalists are not allowed in right now, and these stories are to be told, the world is going to be horrified, and people are going to say, I didn't know, but you did know. We all knew. We all knew.
Let me, because there's a lot that you've said, and I know I'm going to get all sorts of pushback in the comments. So let me go ahead and put out there some of the objections that, that we always hear. What about this claim that Hamas is embedding among the journalists, or Hamas is embedding among the civilians, and therefore the IDF has to go after them?
Well, I don't know what that means. Hamas is embedded with the civilians or embedded with the journalists. Is it possible that they have been embedded with journalists? 100%. Just as the IDF came in and did operations dressed as ambulance drivers. So is this possible? It's completely in the realm of possibility. But when those 2 Catholic women were shot by Israeli snipers coming out of church, Hamas was nowhere around. Last week, when after the tank attack, Holy Family Church they were bombing relentlessly in the neighborhood of Holy Family Church with debris and shrapnel flying into the church. Hamas was not in the area, according to the Christian community there. No, Hamas hadn't been there for months in any way. 95% of the buildings are destroyed. So if you were to say Hamas has 40,000 fighters, which is on the high end, in the midst of a population of 2 million people, where more civilians have been killed than Hamas fighters. I mean, Hamas is spending all of its time, I guess, embedding itself with civilians, hiding behind people, and stealing in food. It doesn't make sense. It's just not possible. 95% of the buildings in a town that's, with a population similar to Milwaukee are 40,000 fighters in all of the buildings all of the time, hiding behind every civilian, hiding in the churches. They're not in the churches. They're not.
It seems that's always the rationale they use. If they bomb a hospital, if they bomb a school, or if they bomb a church, or if they just flatten whole cities, it's always, well, Hamas was there, or they have tunnels or things like that.
Yeah, you can't disprove that, right? They don't even try to prove it. They never try to prove it. And they just look the other way and yawn. When IDF soldiers were captured on film raping a Palestinian, yawn, nothing happens. When 2 Catholic women are shot by snipers in church, nothing no consequences, nothing happens. Now, this is in the fog of chaos and war in Gaza. Well, let's just look at the West Bank in Teba. You can look at Teba, and right now, for those of you who don't know, aren't aware, just Google search West Bank Christians, Zionist attacks. All day, every day, Zionist settlers are beating and abusing Catholic and Orthodox Christians and stealing their homes. My friend, who is a Catholic Christian in Bethlehem, she's been beaten, abused. They've tried to steal her home. And just this week, they killed her dog. I mean, this is the kind of harassment that they have to put up with all of the time. So if you can see what settlers do under the nose of the IDF in the West Bank to Catholics, where anyone can easily see what's happening, what do you think is happening in Gaza? And you can go to our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com, where we have videos when I interviewed Palestinians that we had evacuated from Gaza. One of the women we interviewed was a Christian woman who the IDF broke into her house, smashed her crucifixes on camera, put it on the internet, and you see the footage in our little film because we have it. It was the IDF soldiers filmed themselves and put it on social media. They went into this woman's home, they smashed her crucifix, smashed her statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, then dressed up in her underwear and pranced around and wrote pornographic graffiti on her walls of a beautiful young Catholic woman that lives in Gaza. So this is what they're doing when they think the world can't see. You can see what they're doing when the world is watching, when all eyes are on Teva, and the whole world is watching the West Bank, and all we see is that settlers beat up and abuse Christians under the nose of the IDF with no consequences to the settlers. And God forbid a Palestinian try to defend themselves, they'll be disappeared into a prison system and lost forever. So what the real scandal is, as you said, Catholics who consume evangelical Christian Zionist media, and they have internalized it. It's one thing for an evangelical Christian to be a Christian Zionist because, that's their faith. That's what their faith teaches. But you cannot be a Catholic and deny. If you're a Catholic, you have to acknowledge one thing. You have to acknowledge that Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of all of the promises of Abraham, and he, in fact, is the third temple. So the desire to build a third temple is really anti-Christ. It is a denial of Christ. In fact, Julian the Apostate in the 3rd century, to disprove Christ, tried to rebuild the third temple, and it miraculously was destroyed by lightning and fireballs, which historians documented. So, which is quite interesting. So then when you see a Catholic that excuses the crimes of Israel, they cannot do so theologically. So they're doing so based on sort of an ethno-nationalism. It's really just based in a racism. And it's even more repugnant to see Catholics defend the state of Israel than an evangelical Christian Zionist, because you can at least say the evangelical Christian Zionist believes this is divine will, but the Catholic could not accept that and still remain a Catholic. So what's the basis of their hatred to Palestinians? It has to be based in a sort of an ethno-nationalism.
Back in 2023, shortly after October 7th, it was my first ever venture into this topic ever in my entire life. I'm not a Middle East expert. I've always been very cautious about weighing in because I don't know enough. I know the situation's complex. But I do remember devoting one episode of my podcast back in 2023, just laying out basic Catholic teaching on just war doctrine versus total war. And I was very disturbed at the time when the then Israeli defense minister, I don't know if you remember, Yoav Gallant, he had ordered a complete siege of the Gaza Strip. This was, immediately after October 7th. And he said, we're cutting off all food, water, fuel, supplies, etc. And I noted in my show, and I was very calm, very rational, just laid out Catholic teaching. I also, noted that according to the Geneva Conventions, this is a war crime. You can't use starvation as a weapon of war against civilians. And I just very naively thought that if I just laid everything out rationally and calmly, also obviously the carpet bombing too, that Catholics would understand, oh yes, this is wrong. And I was actually amazed by the pushback that I got from Catholics who just, again, the whole anti-Semitic and you support Hamas and you support terrorists. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was very naive at the time. But I'm sure that you have gotten a lot of pushback. You've probably gotten a lot of the same sort of, response. I mean, why is this?
I'll be surprised that I haven't gotten more pushback, to be honest. The hardest part for me is it hasn't been the pushback. I mean, occasional trolls in social media, but not even really that much because we are delivering aid to widows and orphans and to Christians. On October 7th, the first thing we did at VPP was we put out we have a program in Africa where it's called the Vulnerable Parish Program, where we put armed guards and we install security cameras in churches that are likely to be attacked by Boko Haram or other extremist organizations. And we wrapped up a synagogue in an African country that we knew was vulnerable. And that was one of the first things we did. So I didn't want to see copycat attacks on a vulnerable Jewish community in North Africa. And I haven't gotten that yet, a bit of it. The hard part for me is I have friends who are Jewish and are truly committed Zionists, and it's a part of their identity, and it's their community. And they feel that I hate them, or I've betrayed them, or they're confused on why I'm speaking out so vocally for the Palestinians. And, I was just at this event with these Palestinian and Jewish leaders in New York City wanting to address the ethnic cleansing and the crimes in Gaza. And both the Jewish and the Palestinian leaders, they brought up anti-Semitism as much as they brought up the struggles of the Palestinian people today. And, I raised my hand in the Q&A section and didn't give a question, but I made a comment. I was that guy. And I said, the Palestinians are enough. Palestinians are an end in themselves. We're not against the slaughter of women and children and the decimation of a community because it will lead to a rise in Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. The Palestinian people are an end in themselves. But it is right to be concerned about enthusiasms of hatred and a rise in Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. You could look at St. Maximilian Kolbe, who was an outspoken vocal critic of Zionism in going back into the late teens and early 20s of the last century. But he also was passionately committed to defending Jews from violence. And so I think of St. Maximilian Kolbe as a model on how to do this. But those of us who are rightfully concerned about various enthusiasms of hatred, the best thing that we can do as Catholics is say that collective punishment against any community is never acceptable. And if you cannot today, in our community, when it's acceptable to say, drop nuclear bombs on that little civilian population that has nothing more than AK-47s, drop nuclear bombs on them, and there's no consequence. Where Ambassador Huckabee, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, can mock the Catholics, deny their faith, attack Ireland, France, and the UK on X, which he does because of their commitment of solidarity to the Palestinian people. This is how deep the prejudice against Palestinians is in this country. So if you as a Catholic cannot stand with the Palestinians against this kind of prejudice and power, if you think when it becomes politically expedient and acceptable to be anti-Semitic and to brutalize Jews, if you think you'll have the courage to stand up for them, you're deluding yourself. The very people that today, especially in our tribe on the right, we're considered the right, conservatives, Orthodox Catholics. In our tribe, if you don't have the community to speak out against this live stream genocide against the Palestinians, hundreds of whom are your co-religionists, don't kid yourself that when it comes, and the day will come, when there's enthusiasms of violence and hatred against the Jews, that you will have the courage to advocate for them. You're nuts, because you don't even have the courage to advocate for your own co-religionists, the Christians in Gaza and the West Bank, who descend from the apostles' families. If you won't stand up for them, don't tell me you will stand up for any community when it comes at a risk. And that's what's been beautiful to see, that across ideology, across religious communities, it's been really interesting for me to see who have been those people that have had the courage to risk, what people told me, you're going to destroy your organization, Jason, it's not prudent for you to do this. Think of all the good work you're doing in Sudan and Nigeria and Afghanistan. Don't waste your capital on these people. Well, if I can't speak up against what's happening in Gaza, I should never speak up again. And we're delivering canisters of food, of baby formula in Gaza this week. And they say from the child in the womb to the child in Gaza. And when I started in the pro-life movement in the late 80s, after I lost a child to a forced abortion while I was in basic training, and I was very active in the Republican Party in the late 80s and early 90s, people would say, Jason, it's okay to be pro-life, but be prudent, don't be, maybe now is not the time and this isn't the way. You hear the same things today. But when I'm advocating for our co-religionists and the widows and orphans and families of Gaza, that I should do it. I shouldn't do it so loud. I shouldn't be so vocal. I shouldn't be so aggressive. Yeah, I've heard this before every time, by the way. we as Catholics should be raising our voice as loud as possible, advocating for the most vulnerable people in the world, because that is our vocation. It's to love God and love our neighbor and to inspire others to do the same. And I think right now there's no better way for our apostolate to do it than serving the families of Gaza.
Well, amen, and God bless you for the work that you're doing over there. You know, I mean, this situation with regard to Gaza, it's people make the mistake of thinking it's about left versus right, when it really is just about right versus wrong. And that's the thing about being a Catholic, is our beliefs don't fit neatly into left or right at all. And, you know, our own Holy Father, Pope Leo, has been very outspoken about what's happening in Gaza, as he should be. And you mentioned Babylon Bee before. Both Babylon Bee as well as the executive director of Philos Project criticized the Pope, claiming that he's obsessively focusing only on Gaza and Israel while ignoring all the Christians and Catholics being killed by Islamists around the world. That's just a blatant falsehood. It's just so breathtakingly false. And yet they have doubled down on that in the face of Catholics giving them examples of the Pope calling out, you know, Islamists for killing Christians. You know, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, no, it's, you know, I hear it. Jason, why are you wasting your time on Gaza when you have all the work to do in the world in Sudan and Nigeria, which we do? We just lost one of our VPP partners was killed 3 weeks ago defending 3 seminarians from a violent assault in Nigeria. In Sudan, we have a therapeutic food program, and the truth is we could raise $100 million and it wouldn't be enough to stem, you know, the problems that are happening in Sudan right now. So, of course, also in India, with the rise of the Hinduva and the violence against the Christian communities in India, it's unprecedented levels. In China, the CCP has disappeared 15 bishops. 15 bishops just disappeared, and there's been silence. And, you know, at VPP, I write about all of this. We speak about all of this. But whenever I mention Gaza, they say, go back to talking about that. Why are you wasting your breath on them and not this? And I'll tell you, one of the reasons why I speak more on Gaza than the other issues is the Speaker of the House isn't going to Nigeria to cheer Boko Haram on as they're attacking Catholics. But Mike Johnson, who is a member of Congress from the most Catholic state in the Union, Louisiana, I believe, is the most Catholic state in the Union, literally goes to the West Bank, meets with the settlers that are attacking Catholics and tells them, well, that's your land, as if the descendants of the Jews that accepted Jesus who have lived there for 2,000 years have to vacate their farms and their homes for these folks that just jumped off the plane from Moscow or Manhattan. It's ridiculous. And so that's why we have to speak so up as Catholics, because our family members, our friends, they're openly advocating for genocide and an ethnic cleansing. They're not cheering the CCP on and the Uyghur genocide. They're not cheering Boko Haram on. They're not cheering on the Hindu nationalists, but they are apologizing for, we are all funding, and we are all watching live streamed, the brutalization of a powerless, embattled community, the Palestinians of Gaza.
Let me ask you just one final question here, because I, a couple of weeks ago reported on the attack in Taiba against some of these Christians, and a couple of people reached out to me, sent me an article about how that was just all propaganda. And I guess my question is, you actually know people on the ground, know Christians on the ground in Taiba. So is this all propaganda, or is it's been happening for a while, the settlers attacking Christians?
This is what's been so disheartening about some of the groups that you've mentioned, or Ambassador Mike Huckabee. They openly engage in dishonesty. They are dishonest. They will take every opportunity to try to undermine the truth of what's happening. They deny the obvious facts that are right in front of them. And I am in daily communication with the Christian community in the West Bank. I am in daily, constant communication with the Christians in Gaza. I have logistics partners operating all over Gaza all of the time, and I'm in daily communication with them. The idea that these settlers are brutalizing Christians in the West Bank is absurd. It's like they're for the whole world to see. I invite people to come with me and go and have an opportunity. You can talk to the Christians in Gaza. They're not hard to find or reach. People don't want to know the truth. If Israel wants to deny there's starvation in Gaza, well, let journalists in to document what's not happening. Why, when Israel did airdrops, and the airdrops are a sham, with all the theater of airdrops, just let in a few trucks. But they don't want to let in a few trucks. All these airdrops that are so expensive cost you $500,000 to deliver the same amount of food that you could deliver with just one truck rolling over the border for, a few $100 in diesel. It's just theater. Why did they demand that the reporters not take pictures of what they are looking at outside the window? Because it's unspeakably horrible. And the lie, when you have a U.S. Army Green Beret was shot and received a Purple Heart, say he witnessed snipers killing children who just wanted food. They wanted to attack his integrity. Yeah, they launched a smear campaign on Pilar. So that's what they do. They don't address the claims. They attack those who are making the claims. You had a child that was featured in that died of a disease related to malnutrition. They said, well, see, he didn't starve to death. He died of a disease. Yeah, a disease exacerbated and related to malnutrition. They look for every opportunity to gaslight, to obfuscate. They say that Pizza Bala is Hamas, that Pope Leo is Hamas. Like, it's unbelievable. There's no one we can trust, I guess. The only people we can trust is the Israeli Defense Forces spokespersons. And if there's any accusation of human rights abuses or crimes, well, then let's just ask the IDF and they can launch an investigation into themselves and tell us there's nothing to worry about.
Right. It's just unbelievable, really. I mentioned that you just published a book, Dispatches from the Great Campaign, Defending Life on the Front Lines. Could you just kind of give a quick summary of that? And also, where can people find this book?
Well, if you go to our website, vppbook.com, and make a gift of $20 or more to our work in Gaza, you get a free copy of the book. Or you can go to our website, vulnerablepeopleproject.com as well. You can get it at Sophia Press, Amazon. And they're dispatches of 30 years of my work on the front lines of the culture war, from the early battles to defend the child in the womb to our work in Ukraine, Sudan, Gaza, Iraq, Afghanistan. So it's just, it's a look at our work to defend life around the world over the past 30 years.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to go do that. $20 donation. Is that so? Let people. Where can people find the Vulnerable People Project if they want to give?
It's vulnerablepeopleproject.com. You can get it there.
Okay, vulnerablepeopleproject.com. Excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there's so much more we could talk about, but we're running out of time. So, again, God bless you for all the good work that you're doing over there. I appreciate that you're actually one of the few Catholics you're putting your money where your mouth is, and doing just incredible work over there, but also being very vocal and outspoken about injustice and, quite frankly, war crimes. And I'm glad that you're calling people to account for being too silent over this. I understand the fear that people might have speaking out, because I've been the target of a lot of this very vicious calumny, being called anti-Semitic or pro-Hamas, which is utterly absurd and ridiculous and, quite frankly, lazy. It means nothing at this point. But as Catholics, we do have to speak out about this, just like Jason says. So please go support him, support the Vulnerable People Project, buy his books, watch his podcast, and also please allow yourself to be challenged. Because the more I engage with Catholics on this topic, the more I realize that there are lots of Catholics that are more invested in placing their political interests over Catholic teaching. But Jason, thank you once again so much, and God bless you for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Christine.
All right, everybody. Again, I ask each of you to please do a spiritual gut check, see whether you might be engaging in the same sort of rationalization and justification of total war, of, mass slaughter of civilians that the church clearly condemns. Please see whether you're engaging in the same sort of dehumanization that is totally antithetical to the teachings of Christ. And above all, please pray for peace in that area. All right, everybody, thank you so much for watching and listening. And in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward, boldly.